Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for Venture Houston 2023, hosted by HX Venture Fund. And now, please welcome to the stage Managing Director of HX Venture Fund, Sandy Guitar.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I am Sandy Guitar, Managing Director at HX Venture Fund, and my partners, Guillermo Borda and Elise Hobson, and I are thrilled to welcome you to Venture Houston 2023. Thank you to all of our sponsors that you saw on the screen there. We simply could not do this without them, and a special thank you to our Emerald sponsors, Insperity and Rice University. I couldn't start the day, however, without making a mention to recognize the leadership of my amazing partner, Elise Hobson, without whom today could not be possible. So a special thanks to Elise. So today is our third annual Venture Houston conference. Now this year, we are focusing on one of Houston's very key strengths, its position as a leader in the energy transition journey. Our conversations are at the intersection of decarbonization and digitalization. As our plans developed, many asked, does decarbonization affect me? Is my company a fit for this conversation? And our answer is a definite yes. The reason? No matter what business you are in, you have a carbon footprint. The venture ecosystem knows this already. In 2011, you'll recall Mark Andreessen famously stated that software is eating the world. And today, over a decade later, we take for granted that software drives innovation. In 2023, we believe that decarbonization is an innovation wave of such transformational significance that, like software, it will soon be integral to our lives and legacies. HX Venture Fund is a world-class, Houston-based venture capital fund of funds, generating compelling returns for our limited partners. Backed by 26 leading global corporates and institutional investors, our model connects corporations, startups, and venture funds to drive innovation. It starts with making connections that matter, and that's going to happen right here. So please take a look around you, because in this room today, we have over 50 HX Venture Fund limited partners and global corporates joining us. We have over 300 people, believe it or not, from outside of Houston, across 70 cities, 25 states. Approximately 100 venture capitalists, and almost twice as many leaders from the startup community. So if you do the math of the total assets under management in the room today and intersect that with the number of startups, it means that every handshake between a startup and investor represents about $200 million of capital in terms of experience and dry powder. And yesterday, for those who are with us during Capital Connect, we were able to create over 450 meetings between investors, startups, and others with the support of Halliburton Labs. Yes, today is about sharing best practices, sharing vision, and sharing experience in developing that vision. But let's not stop there, because today, cap tables will be built as venture capitalists find the founders that fit their investment thesis. Today, entrepreneurs will make a career shift, and they'll join a Houston startup that is in growth mode. Venture capitalists will speak with Houston founders and offer advice that might save that founder a pivot. And that can mean everything. These are the results we saw at Venture Houston in years past, and absolutely what we expect today as well. So please enjoy the full day and make yourself at home in this amazing studio hall. But please don't get too comfortable, because today you can move from advice to action if you're ready for it. And now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote panel this morning. Here are two men who are making an enormous impact on the world. Amazingly, both grew up in the back streets of Queens, New York, literally just blocks from one another, without knowing one another. Both were among the first generation of their family to go to college, and both went on to build truly remarkable careers that drive innovation and learning across the globe. They met yesterday for the first time in person at our introduction, and we are delighted to share the stage with them. You guys want to come on in? I'll give a little background as you walk in. With us today, Carmichael Roberts. Carmichael leads the investment committee for Breakthrough Energy, a multi-billion-dollar platform founded by Bill Gates that seeks to fund and launch truly transformational companies in climate and energy transition innovation. The limited partners and board of Breakthrough Energy today include most of the world's biggest company builders and venture capitalists ever, including Abigail Johnson, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, John Arnold, David Rubenstein, John Doerr, Julian Robertson, Ray Dalio, Vinod Khosla, so many others. The list goes on. And to say that Carmichael is in the know about highly impactful energy transition topics and innovation would be a serious understatement. Carmichael has a long career in venture, first at Northbridge Ventures in Boston before co-founding his own firm, Material Impact, which is a $700 million venture firm in Boston. We at HX Venture Fund are very proud investors in multiple of Carmichael's funds. Also, Reggie, of course, is very well known to this audience, but for those who may be from out of town, Reggie is Rice University's 8th president, leading over 8,200 students, 900 faculty to a new level of distinction in research and specifically in innovation. He's also a professor of civil and environmental engineering, a professor of mechanical engineering, and an expert in earthquakes. And without any further ado, I'll pass the stage over. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Can you hear me okay? Can everybody hear me well? Great. It's great to see such a wonderful, large audience early in the morning for this wonderful Q&A that we have with Carmichael. As Sandy mentioned, prior to the call, we learned that we have a lot in common, myself and Carmichael. We both grew up in Queens, actually about 2 miles from each other. We graduated from high school the same year, so we are a similar age. He ended up going to Duke, and I ended up going out to the west to Berkeley. But we had similar paths. He ended up doing a PhD, I ended up doing a PhD. He stayed at Duke, I stayed at Berkeley, and then our paths sort of took different directions. I went to academia, and he went into the venture field as an entrepreneur, and obviously has done incredible things. So I want to start with, he also, the PhD wasn't enough for him, so he also decided to get an MBA from MIT. I did not get an MBA. I stopped with my PhD. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about your journey, how you got here, what motivated you to get into this area, and what do you attribute your success to?
So I gotta say, we got one more thing we got in common, my friend.
Yes, we do.
And I think you wear it well. So how did how I got to this point? The reality is, I did want to go into academia, right? I remember, and you will remember because we almost in lockstep have the same timeline. And I remember when I was graduating with my PhD, I went to Harvard to do a postdoc. I had a bunch of academic offers that were coming in from that, and I was thinking about, hey, I know Boston does a lot of stuff in biotech, but I think it would be great to do something wherever I go. And today, what I would say is manufacturing-oriented technology stuff. So how do I not just take hard tech, deep science, and do something that would be great for the biotech and pharmaceutical industry, but how do we work on things like energy, cement, steel? How do we manufacture things for electronics and so forth? So this is what I was thinking about doing, but the entrepreneurial bug also bit me while I was at Harvard because I worked for a person who was named George Whitesides, who was a prolific, as you know, scientific inventor, academic inventor, who was 30-something years older than me, and he and his colleagues effectively built biotech in the US. And so I had exposure to the entrepreneurial stuff through that, but then, as you do as a new professor, which clearly you did, knowing expertise in earthquakes of all things, which is pretty amazing, you think about where else you want to go. So I got introduced in the midst of this, as George Whiteside said to me, hey, if you're going to go work on some of these topics and build companies, I got to introduce you to these people called venture capitalists. Do you know what venture capitalists are? I said, I have no clue. I don't know what you're talking about. What is venture capitalist? He said, there are people who give money to the entrepreneurs and to build the companies, and you should go pitch your ideas to them before you start as an assistant professor. And I pitched my ideas not for funding, but to try to kind of ask, would the industry be at all interested in investing in early stage on these topics? And I got a consistent answer of no. It was like a flat line. And it was disheartening because I was thinking to myself, I'm going to go in academia and work on stuff that I think is going to be really meaningful. Man, this country is built on making stuff, right? Manufacturing stuff. And I'm thinking, how is it that we don't back these things? And when I delved a little bit deeper and I asked some of the venture capitalists, like, just give me a consistent answer as to why you wouldn't do this. They said, well, we don't think the entrepreneurs really want to work in those areas. Then I went and talked to the entrepreneurs, and I said, well, why don't you want to work in these areas? Well, we would, Carmichael, but we don't think the venture capitalists would give us money for it. So the entrepreneur in me at that point realized, there's a disconnect here. And so what I ended up doing was taking a pause on starting my academic career to try and solve bridge that gap. And what I found out, the good news is what I found out is there's a way of bridging the gap, even though there weren't a lot of people trying to do it. I think this turned out to be good news. At the time, I thought it was, going to be hard to tell my parents and everything. But the bad news was, I'm not going to academia. I'm going to turn these offers down, and I'm going to go this path of an entrepreneur and try and build something here. And eventually, maybe I'll go back to academia after I get. So that story is really how I got involved as an entrepreneur, and in manufacturing-based technologies and businesses, and then from there, just to wind this up, over the next 20 plus years, the world came in my direction. I mean, I was just very fortunate that, now things like energy transition are. But Sandy, you mentioned the stats of where software used the world. That Andreessen Horowitz mentioned, which I thought was really clever. In 2011, if you poll any state right now, schools. I have, by the way, 2 of my nephews here today, and you ask like what are some of the exciting topics, the kinds of stuff that Houston's doing, the kind of stuff that we're talking about today, ranks in the top 5 easily. In most cases, ranks in the top 2 along with AI. So the world came in this direction, and pretty much, and there's a lot in between that I can. And
that's very forward-looking for not to give our age, but that was almost 30 years ago when we were finishing. Nowadays, we are seeing that's more of a trend. PhD students that are finishing, they want to do both academia and startups, and I think we're all working to be able to enable that. But back then, it was probably very risky and probably frowned upon. So you were very bold to be able to do that. You talked about hard tech. Can you talk about the challenges in hard tech? Everybody's familiar with VC around companies like Google and others, but what are some of the specific challenges of being in this space for hard tech?
I would bet that somewhere between 70% to 80% of this audience has to spend time raising money, right? And I would bet that for no one in that 70 to 80%, no matter how successful you are, you would ever say it's easy to raise money. I know I've run into several of you here on that, and I've raised money as a repeat CEO. I've been CEO of 3 different companies. I've been chairman, and I've had to raise money from the funds. When I began to start to describe hard tech, deep science, the general reaction is, oh my gosh, this is like a science experiment that's going to cost a fortune. It may never work. It's going to be hugely capital intensive and take forever to develop because it's not as simple as designing an app for an iPhone or something that's more traditional tech. It runs right into that, I would say historically, it has run right into that wall where people just have a hard time getting their minds around how could you possibly build something with venture capital timeline, with venture capital dollars, around some of these really cool looking things when you talk to me would sound incredibly hard tech, incredibly deep thought science stuff. And I would say initially that's has been the certainly historically, have been the biggest challenge in trying to get people to open up. And I would say, then if you're successful in a company, then the challenge is scaling the ecosystem that needs to get built around a small company to allow it to become a medium-sized company to a large company. It really requires a lot of collaboration, both in the public and the private sector, and a lot of coordination. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. And those are really the predominant things that at least when my partners and I, or when I was an entrepreneur, my team and I, running companies, we found those to be the main things that were on people's minds, that were the impediments.
Yeah. Okay. You spent a lot of time, and yesterday there was a speed dating event during the day. I know you met with some entrepreneurs. You spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs in your business. What makes a great entrepreneur from a VC point of view? What do you look for when you're thinking about making an investment in a company or in a person? Yeah,
I'll tell you. I'll leave her name out today because I ran into someone at your house last night, and I'm going to use her as an example. She asked me, Carmichael, I couldn't wait to see you. My brother is in and met you. And I told him you were going to be here, and her brother met me in Boston. So he said, I got to come say hello to you, and particularly ask you this question. And the question was, I'm in the middle of a PhD program. I want to move more towards venture entrepreneurial stuff. Should I finish the PhD program? And my answer to that by having a question, which is, what are you working on, and do you generally enjoy what you're working on? You're excited about it. And I'm going to leave her anonymous. I'm not going to say what she was working on. But the answer on this and the second question was yes. Every day is not fun, but generally speaking, I'm enjoying myself. And the topic that she was on was really an interesting topic I could see. So I started to think through the lens of the question you just asked. I was thinking to myself in my answer, looking at her more as an entrepreneur, what would make me invest in her? And the thing that I would say that's always pretty consistent in my answer around like who I invest in, as an aside, I told her she should get the PhD because I forgot to say that like bluntly. Like you should do it for like the reasons I'm about to describe. If someone starts a company and they get you excited, and many of you have done this. I know I can see several of you in the audience who I know for a fact have done this or in the middle of doing this. If you get someone really excited about your concept, what is the next thing that they do? They look at you, so they look at this entrepreneurial leader, they look at her, and then figure out what's unique about you to believe now that I'm excited about what this could be, that you have an advantage in building this thing. What's it about you? And I think, Reggie, there's no clear checklist. It can come out in different ways. It could be that somebody got a PhD in a particular subject matter that's a little bit unusual, and she built a company or built a career around that concept, and you look and you go, wow, she's got a background along with who she worked with previously to help train her, and the network she probably knows from reading peer stuff and going to conferences. She's uniquely suited around this particular topic. And if I had to look at 5 things that would make its business successful, she checks the box on 2. And one of them is a superpower. That would make me really interested. Sometimes they don't have any expertise in the thing. But you look and all of a sudden, he's got this something about him that you would look and say, this is exactly the kind of archetype, personality that could pull this off. You can kind of feel it. And that's less of an exact science. It's more of a feel for, this person, even though their background isn't necessarily in this, they're gonna have a real shot at building it. So the number one thing I look for is, once I get excited about a topic, is I start to hone in on the individual or the team, most times both, and I ask myself now, and I tell myself that you've all experienced, there's no such thing as building a company without major bumps in the road. You're going to run into problems. The macro environment changes things and fundraising gets hard. Okay, then fundraising is maybe easier, but then competition, people hard to hire the right people and so forth and these things. And or a key product thing, your customer's giving you a problem, or a competitor pops up. So I started to think, this journey is really difficult. It's not for the faint of heart. What makes me believe that she, when we get to the worst moments, is going to be prepared and unusually suited for dealing with those moments. That's what goes through my mind. Not knowing what that moment is, but knowing it's going to be there, but 100% certainty.
Interesting. We're going to take questions from the audience. I think there's a way for you to ask questions on your computer. I have no idea how that is. And there's a way for me to check those questions, and I still don't know exactly how to do that, so Sandy's going to tell me at some point, or somebody's going to tell me. As I work through some of my additional questions here, we'll soon get to your questions, if you can. Thank you. Here we are in the city of Houston, great city, a little toasty this week. You and others have said, and I've said this, you can't solve climate without Texas, and you can't solve it without Houston. From your perspective, why is Houston so important to the energy transition, and what role can Houston play in the climate and energy transition innovation wave?
So I think I got a few answers. First, let me give a really simple one, because I mentioned it already. But I'd say 80 to 90% of what is doing in energy transition centers around capability of making things, manufacturing things. And if you look objectively, and you don't even put energy aside for a second, but if you just look objectively in the U.S., where are the locations, the states that have an amazing proficiency in processes, manufacturing, chemistries, materials, and handling things? There's no question that Texas has got to be ranked in the top 5%, right? And then within Texas, if you hone in and say, like, where's like a high concentration of companies, it's Houston and the greater Houston area. And that's even without getting specifically into the subject matter. So that's to say, I was, hope he doesn't mind me talking about this, but yesterday I'll leave names out again. I was talking to someone from Halliburton Labs, and I have been for a few years from inception in there when that lab program got created. I had the pleasure of interacting over time from inception, from the senior leadership and throughout. And what was interesting is about a third of our conversations were around him telling me, I'll leave the names out, but him telling me that, hey, we're doing stuff that has nothing to do with energy specifically, that is hugely helpful in manufacturing. And we started talking about all sorts of stuff. And my colleague, Christina Karapataki, was here, and she immediately sat up and said, we have these 3 companies that need exactly those kinds of expertise that's there. And you can name 50 companies easily who could have the same competency and capability, and it's critical. The other part is the energy side. Think about it. Not to be glib about it, but if you pick a state, for that matter, a city within a state, and they say, we're going to be important for energy transition, the first thing you start to ask yourself is, you're important for energy, like just a practical standpoint. And so if you think about energy, and this, I shared this with you, Reggie, early on, when we sat down in the inception days of Breakthrough Energy Ventures, the venture group, we strategized for about 9 months before doing anything. And how does one help build an ecosystem in the middle of what, topics like energy transition and things related to climate and so forth. And one of the things that to build an ecosystem, you have to look at where the key places in the world, starting with your own country. And we mapped out Texas as, a high priority. Because we said we need help. We can't do this without Texas. You can't do energy without Texas, and you can't do energy without Houston. So when you think about transition, the opportunity, I'll say, that Houston has to be the unambiguous leader is huge, because if every other place can do transition, they still can't keep up with Houston, because look at the energy competency that's here. So you're going to, if you're not going to win, you're going to be top 5 in the world if you're serious about it.
Good, and we love to hear that, of course. And obviously, you're sitting here on a university campus. We have a number of great universities here in the city of Houston and around, and in Texas and around the city, around the metro area. What would you say do you view as the role of universities like Rice in the energy transition?
Yeah, you're living it right now. I see what you're doing. We're on the stage right now, and this is an awesome thing. It starts, I think, if I had to name two things off the top of my head, I would say convening, and I would say training and educating, training/educating. I think those two things with a place like Rice, which is internationally, globally known, but particularly you're sitting right in the hub of what I just described in Houston and the importance of it. You and I just by the way, just before we got on stage, we were standing there, and one of the questions that I can tell everybody that I asked you was, who are you collaborating with in terms of the other universities? And you named just about all of them. You were like, oh, this one and that one and this one, but particularly this one. And that's convening. And that's it's not only what you're doing with your students here, it's the fact I mentioned. Two of my nephews are here. Marquise came down from UTSA, from San Antonio, and Antonio is both an A&M alum, and he's at UT right now in grad school, right? And I walked in, and when I walked up with Antonio, all of a sudden he's got 3 or 4 people who are Houston related. Oh, hey, they all know each other, and those are Rice-based folks. That's convening, and I think that you can't do this. I mentioned the public and the private sector, the large companies, the small companies, and the universities, and hopefully the government, which I know you guys are working hard on convening those folks too.
So a related question, and again, please do, if you have questions for Carmichael, please do put it in your chat. Sometimes you hear oil and gas companies are part of the problem. How do you respond to that in terms of, if students are saying, should we be working with oil and gas companies? How do you respond to that? I'm sure that comes up periodically in your travels around the world. How do you respond to that?
First of all, thank goodness that's died down. Meaning, you only say what I say, it's thank goodness it's died down. If I'm talking to, so the other element that's really important is the media. And the media is a very powerful thing, whether you like it or not. And for many years, I ducked the media. I'm not one that wants to talk to the media so much. But it's critical to educate. It's also my responsibility to do that. So I mean, whether I like it or not, I think I'm one of the most quoted people in the climate space right now.
Yes, you are, for sure.
And the thing, so I've gotten to learn the discussions with the media. One of my biggest fears was, let's go back and say, when we sat down and we said, Texas is critical, we need their help. It's exactly, the way it was our vernacular. We need their help in doing this. How do we engage Texas? One of the first things we realized is immediately the media is going to come to us and say, all these large companies are evil. They created this problem. They're going to continue to create the problem. We got to bash them. Now, I'm sure the large companies all recognize that they are complicit in a lot of which that's obvious. At some point, you got to get past that. They do have to change. They're in transition. I think I saw him for a second. This is Bobby Tudor about this. We were talking. You got to get past that vernacular, and you got to figure out how does one work together to do something. And so I've been like this from the very beginning. I'd say from inception was, wow, this is a big opportunity. While everybody's talking negative, my opportunity is to actually figure out how to solve that. How do you work with the large companies? And, if they're not woke, as they say, how do you do that not publicly and help get them there? But then a lot of them are like, hey, help me help you in some respect, and how do you collaborate in that regard? So this has brought me to Houston quite a bit, both physically and virtually in conversations, and lots of large companies. Many of the large companies that HX has mentioned even are collaborators with Breakthrough Energy Ventures and Material Impact on things. So it's figuring out how to get past the obvious. At some point, it's an obvious statement, and you say, okay, that is what it is. Now what do we do? And then hopefully someone is across from you that wants to know, what do you think? And I would say this is very important, and trust you. Feels safe and secure enough to have a real conversation with you, including saying some stuff that's pretty vulnerable that if it ever leaked out, the press would probably get a hold of that and say it, but trust you enough, and then you reciprocate on that trust to actually work with folks on that.
Yeah. Okay. Questions from the audience. Again, I know many of you have questions for Carmichael, and I'm looking for, they're pointing to my iPad here, and you may need to come up and show me specifically where to do this. So this is more of a specific semi-technical question. Why are geothermal ventures usually hard to get VCs on board?
That's good. That is a specific one. So I'm going to do my best in guessing. And
and I know we have a number of people, I know several at Rice that work in geothermal, so it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's more, I think people have back to how hard is it technically to do what you described, and then how hard is it from there to develop a robust business, and then that's in a vacuum just on the topic, and then you're competing with other ideas in other areas where venture capitalists may be looking and saying this quarter, it may not be a specific count, but they may say I may do three investments, 3 new companies this quarter, and so you're competing against all these other areas. That said, I'm biased a little bit, but I think geothermal is actually a really good area. While it's a topic that's hard to get funded, I don't really find venture capitalists telling me, at least our network of co-investors, saying that geothermal is a topic that is one that won't get touched at all. It's just harder, I think, to explain because there aren't good examples of how one could build a big company off of geothermal, like a corollary, and I think it's just a harder one to do. That said, I think those are the best things to work on. The best things to work on are the ones that go back to what I was talking about my career. Is to work on things that other people aren't doing that they think is hard, and then figure out how to solve that, and you become the category creating category-defining company in a space, and geothermal could be one of them.
Yeah. So this is a question that came from the audience. What advice do you have someone early in their career that wants to invest their talent and their time in the transition? How would you recommend that they get started?
Yeah. So one thing, we talked about our backgrounds together, that we were like surprised on this phone when we were going over talking today, and we found out, holy smoke, we grew up in the same, far enough apart that we didn't know each other, but close enough that we could have walked. We had to be within
a mile
or two from each other at all times. But we talked about this PhD path. The one thing that I try to de-emphasize a little bit is that it's critical that you have a technical background or any particular background in order to participate in this space. I actually think, and I think about some of our teams, and I think about some of the people who are on the board. Some of these names that we talk about who are on the breakthrough board, as an example. Some of them didn't finish college, including our chairman. And Gates, I would say find something that for whatever reason you're intellectually curious and considerably and passionate about, and in your own way you would probably be surprised that you could become more expert in some element of that needs you. And the minute that you begin to put the work in and develop an expertise in something that you're passionate about, that's relevant, I think that's the best path to find your way into this broader area. And then look at companies that are working in that space, and eventually I think you'll land on something, whether it's that specific thing or it leads you to some other thing. I think sometimes I get the general question of, hey, I want to do something in energy transition or in climate, and it doesn't go deeper than that.
Right.
And that's energy transition is such a huge topic. And I would say like honing in on something that's more specific that you're passionate about, and then putting in the work, including the networking and the studying on that topic, will go a long way.
And this is an interesting question. What is the VC viewpoint on those that are not first in the technology but are fast followers? What's your view of those types of companies?
Oh, I think that's, many of the best companies are the fast followers, right? And I remember, I can share this with you. So my counterpart on the Breakthrough Energy Investment Committee is a guy named Eric Toon. And I remember Eric and I going to our first board meeting at Breakthrough, and we're sitting there a little bit in awe with these folks on this board, and wondering like, what questions are we going to ask them? And I remember asking a question that goes right up this alley. I asked the board, okay, what does success look like? And let me frame it a little bit. Imagine if one of our companies, imagine there's an area, let's take geothermal since it was brought up. Imagine there's an area that is really hard and VCs are not investing in as fast. And imagine if we decided that area is critical and important, and we started the first company, or the first notable company, and we built a thesis that allowed other venture capitalists to look and go, you know what, that makes sense. We need one of those. And then so by definition, we've got our company, and then all of a sudden 7 other companies pop up in the space. And suppose company number 4 is the winner. Our company does okay. Maybe it makes 3 times the investment and does okay. But company number 4 is just a monster. It's just phenomenal. It's what everybody cares and reads. It's like Tesla for electric cars, right? I remember asking the board, you guys mad at us? You mad at the, you feeling good about the investment committee? Because in some sense, we only, the return is, it's okay. But the impact, without us, that area would not have that company that's a game changer. And without exception, I tell you, people were so excited to answer that question. You can imagine everyone, they all said the same thing, almost immediately with detail. We think that would be great. Like if you did that, that would be, when we need to make money, let's be clear, it's not a philanthropy. But we also want to have that kind of an impact out there. And so that's a real conversation, and I can tell you, it's too early to tell, but we've got a couple of examples, for good or for bad, I think that's happened,
right,
where we've opened up an area, and some other folks have invested in a company, and their company may turn out to be bigger than ours. And I'm going to be jealous and say, doggone it, I missed it. But I'm also going to smile because a lot of the investment community were friends, and they'll come up and say, we wouldn't have done that company if not for the blueprint right that was in front. And so I think it's great to be the fast follower in figuring things out. It's also great to be first.
Right.
If you can.
You mentioned earlier, somebody's trying to pick your brain, get a little deeper into your mind. You mentioned earlier the 5 boxes for great entrepreneurs. What are those boxes? Can you mention a few of those? Yeah, I could have said 3, I could have said 8. It all depends on the company, right? And so what I do is, and try to have my team do this, is if they look at a particular company and say, ooh, this is a great company, I'm going to pick a topic, that's making clean drinking water. And we have one of those, and there's several out there. We have one of those called Source. You start to look and go, well, what are the aspects that would be critical to developing a company that's going to provide clean drinking water? Then you start thinking that's a global issue. Like in any given day, 52% of the planet, unfortunately, lacks access to clean drinking water. And who's in that 52% shifts around, whether things get frozen or something breaks or it can be all, your city, it can happen when you don't think it can. So it's a big issue, but it's a global issue that no one can hide from. So if you're going to build a company like that, I'm just picking that one as an example, you start to ask yourself, what are the key things that are important? Well, water needs to cost low. We need a cost point of buying water that's low enough that people will choose it. It's a global business almost immediately. That's not one of these businesses that you do local. Like, for example, a nuclear, if you have a nuclear fusion company,
and you build that in like 4 areas, that could be game changing if it's a big, but this is one that you need to be almost everywhere. So you need almost immediately, as soon as you have a product, to know you have a global business. It's second to the air we breathe, the water we drink. It's very personal, right? Our kids, ourselves, our families, our friends. So you begin to like list out, these are the things that are very important. And then you look and you say, all right, Mrs. Entrepreneur, Mr. Entrepreneur, who are you and how do you stack up against these? And I can keep going on the list of the water one if I wanted, but I could have picked a different topic. You then look and say, is there something really unique that makes me believe that you're going to be able to go to Ecuador, you're going to be able to go to Samburu, Kenya, you're going to be able to go to Melbourne, Australia, you're going to go to Mexico City, and you're going to go to Flint, Michigan, and you're going to be able to get people to want to drink your water. Like, what makes me believe that? And you kind of go through it. So there's no 5 that are, in my approach, there's no 5 that are consistent across the board, except for that one I told you. The one I mentioned is like with that certain quality of that entrepreneur that has to make me believe that, that she's just unusual for this effort.
Yeah. So the companies that Breakthrough Energy Ventures invest in need capital to scale beyond venture. What are you doing to position them for that stage of their development?
Yeah, so back to the ecosystem, that's a great question. So just 7 years ago, our thought was, boy, oh boy, we hope that there's a moment that one of the major issues that you have is scaling, because by definition, that means you got several great companies, some yours and many not yours, that are out there. And the only difference between them realizing their potential or not is solving the scaling piece. And I mentioned that the key thing around that is building the ecosystem. And I'll come back to the answer I said about rice and convening. And I can talk very specific about Breakthrough, just so you guys know how we think about it. So at this point, because of who's backed Breakthrough, and we've been fortunate to build enough of a reputation that we can help convene, what we try to do now is, both in the public and in the private sector, get those groups who 6 or 7 years ago weren't thinking about energy transition at all because there weren't any companies to think about scaling. You got to build the inventory. So think about how new this really is to them. It's relatively new that they're trying to develop their businesses from project financing to large companies collaborating in a particular way. And what has to happen is that ecosystem has to get built around that small company. And again, it should be ideally customized. Like what state you're in that you're doing the manufacturing is what we're finding can be very different than where you started. I mean, I don't think they mind. I can talk about some of our companies. We have a company in California that's Redwood Materials that has manufacturing now in South Carolina. We have a company, Forum Energy, that was sort of bi-coastal, but mostly Massachusetts, has manufacturing in West Virginia. And we have actually quite a few doing manufacturing in Texas as well, in different places. So I think the ecosystem has to be, we got some groups where the manufacturing is outside the U.S. in collaboration, which has been an interesting thing with manufacturing in the U.S. So it's really building the ecosystem around that, and we're still really early right now. The good news is there's a lot of pain that's going. The reason that's a great question is there are literally at this point hundreds of very good companies with that problem. And you would say, how's that good news? That's good news that we got hundreds of these companies, maybe even thousands, but definitely hundreds, that the only thing between them being successful or not now is the scaling issue. And I get called a lot about that on both sides, both the companies, the public and the private sources for capital to do it, the collaborators and the small companies.
Yeah. So we have a question about capital at this time. Specific to venture capital, would you say that the momentum behind energy transition is strong and permanent enough to overcome how expensive capital is currently?
Wow, I would say, I'm going to separate that question. Absolutely strong. I would say the momentum It's strong. You don't know how strong something is until it gets tested. So if you look 3 years ago, it felt like so much capital was coming into the space, and at that point in time, you may say, "Oh, that's strong." Well, you don't really know until the macro situation changes, like it has done in the last 18 months, and you begin to ask whether it can still hold. And things have slowed down. So I know a lot of you out there running companies and or funds, and you're trying to raise new funds, and it's harder. It's a lot harder for all of us. I totally get that, but it's still happening. It hasn't been turned off. Whereas I have friends in other areas of venture capital, man, they can't raise a fund at all. The companies can't get any money at all in the sectors. We don't see that in the energy transition and the climate-related space. So it's challenged, it's slower, but it's kind of showing resilience around it. And so I would say from that standpoint, the venture part that you mentioned, I think is still strong.
Since you began investing in for Breakthrough Energy Ventures, what have been the most important learnings that influence how you'll deploy energy and climate capital going forward?
Yeah. Well, one of them, I would say, you hear me I keep talking about the ecosystem, and I think this room has all the components of the ecosystem in this room, in fact. And so one of the learnings, we'll take a step back and say, we had the first wave of energy-related investments in sort of the clean tech time period, which I think there was a lot learned. So I wouldn't call it, some people say, oh, that was a failure, we lost all our money. Okay, but there was a lot of learning in that time period. And then I'd say this next wave of investing in the broader energy transition climate time, a lot of those learnings have been applied, and some new things have popped up that have been tested in terms of thesis. So one of the things that I think is huge is the need to collaborate. And I will say, traditional venture capital, as much as you would like, biotech is being the exception. Typically one firm, maybe two firms, comes in and backs a company and develops it, and then you elbow everybody else out. And that's certainly happened in traditional tech. And what we have seen in that we think is critical, past, present, and future in this space is the need to collaborate. It's one of the biggest learnings that we've had, and we try to foster it a lot. So that would mean finding ways to build that ecosystem around the small company is really key in a very different, and probably very different to some other areas. I don't know if AI needs to do that, for example. My guess is not like energy transition and climate. So I think collaboration has been a really big thing that we've learned. The other thing I would say, and I hope it stays this way, is the topic overall is gone from not a top 10 topic to, like I mentioned now, it's a top 3 topic in most places. So the other thing we've learned is people want to build real businesses. They want to make money. I'm a big business side. As much as I want to solve a lot of the world's problems, I'm also unabashedly, I tell my kids this, an entrepreneurial capitalist. So I want to build businesses that are valuable, because I think that's the only way you solve things anyway. But we're learning that can be done, and people are super interested in doing that.
So you mentioned AI and all these projections around the energy needs, around compute power,
right,
projections in 10 years. How do we balance that with the fact that we know we're going to need these algorithms, and AI is something that's here to stay and going to continue to proliferate? How do we balance that with the growing energy needs that we know will exist with that, and obviously the climate challenge?
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity on that. And, again, I'd say, you said, how do we balance that? So I'm going to go ahead and take what you said and kind of interpret it in my way so people know what part of I'm answering. So the amount of energy that gets consumed, this is what you were pointing out, from things that relates to AI compute power is tremendous theoretically, and at some point is going to be actual. The ability to have that become a reality, what stands between that will be not just whether you come up with ways that AI works, but ways that you can manufacture a plant or a place that actually can handle the energy that sits around it that's not too disruptive. And so that is, and a ton of capital is going there. So if you're investing in AI and you're doing any of the things that I mentioned, which about looking at the risks in your business, you have to list out, if I'm successful with this, this, and this, but I can't figure out how to get the energy and manage that in a way that this particular area allows me to do it, you won't be successful as a business. So what we're seeing is AI starting to come over into our area necessarily. And so that the two areas that seem to have the most capital that are being invested in are AI and energy related stuff as a result. So to be determined how we solve it. I think it's early, but a huge opportunity for the folks who are in the energy side to glean some of the momentum off of the AI side, because they need us.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of research going on in that particular area. How should a VC that it traditionally invests in software as a solution think about opportunities in climate?
Yeah, so I mentioned this idea of building the ecosystem early on, and so one of the things we looked at Breakthrough was who are the VCs out there that if we can get them to do something in the energy space, the climate space, or something in the manufacturing space, it would catch the attention of the broader community and help then bring more to the party. Let me say it another way. Software, Sandy mentioned software used the world was what Mark said at Andreessen Horowitz. So how do you get that firm to want to do something in a space that probably seems too far away from anything that they have an expertise in software? I think I'll tell you what we did. We started to look at companies, which is probably at least half our companies fall in this category, where you need that expertise in software and related topics and traditional tech in order to build that company into a large company. You need those software-based systems, and this is before AI became a thing. And so we would deliver whenever we had one of those. We would help the entrepreneur go pitch the non-traditional venture community and why we need their help and why they should come on board. So we have a company called, to give one example, we have a company called Cobalt, Kobold, and that's a play on words like cobalt. And I think many of you, probably most of you, know how important cobalt is for battery-related technologies and how scarce it is and how certain regions of the world have a lot of control over the cobalt. So you want to find, as an example, you want to find more minerals and things like that. But if you're going to try to find stuff in unusual places, the amount of software, compute, algorithm stuff that you need to do is considerable. And I talked to a couple of really cool companies yesterday, by the way, that also are looking at bringing software and proprietary algorithms to mining. And again, I won't say the company's name, but he's probably smiling now, but I mentioned it. But so that's an important thing. So how do you build an investor syndicate around that? So what we imagine is we don't need two breakthrough energies in that deal. We need a breakthrough energy, and if we can have our way, why can't we get why can't we get A16Z to come on board as our software partner in this? And that's what we did. And so what you try to do deliberately is find these avenues, and once they get involved, at the very least, what happens is they get comfortable with, oh wow, we do have something to bring to this area. And if you're really successful, they later on compete, and we've lost deals to software companies, like where they picked someone else other than us. And you probably say, why would I smile at that? Because I'm building the ecosystem, and the way you make a lot of difference and a lot of money is you have to have competition. You got to lose sometimes, and to kind of and we're starting to see a lot more of that.
And I think this screen is flashing at me, so I think we're running out of time. We did get through most of the questions. Carmichael, we really appreciate you. I know you're a busy man. You have a lot going on. We appreciate you coming to Houston. I know you'll be back And we appreciate you spending the time with this audience and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Carmichael.
Thanks for having me.